All right, college football and stuff here. I'm going to be going over the 2020 college football playoff games in this video. All right, first up, I'm going to be talking about Alabama and Notre Dame. I think this is going to be the less interesting of the two playoff games. I was a little bit annoyed that they put Notre Dame into the playoffs. I understand it. I mean, they got a win against Clemson, which was a very good win. And I don't really know who would have deserved the spot instead of them. Maybe Cincinnati, but I will see how Cincinnati looks in their game against Georgia. Maybe Texas A&M. We'll see how Texas A&M looks. I think if Texas A&M goes out and blows someone away, I think they really should have gotten a shot. But, you know, at the same time, I wouldn't have wanted to see a rematch between Alabama and Texas A&M in the playoffs. So I can understand why Notre Dame got in there. I think it was a hard spot to put a team, but I really do have some issues with putting a team in the playoff who got absolutely blown away in their last game. And if you look at those two games between Notre Dame and Clemson, they won by 7 points in the first time they played, which was a good win, but then they lost by 24. And if you average those two games together, Clemson is still wins by 10 points. So I do think Clemson is significantly better than Notre Dame, and I think that is going to show in this game between Alabama and Notre Dame. I'm sort of expecting sort of what we've seen from when Oklahoma has made it in the playoffs these past few years. Oklahoma's done okay sometimes, but like last year where LSU just sort of blew them out, I think you're going to see something similar between Alabama and Notre Dame in this game. So I looked up some of the statistics for these teams. So went through their schedules, looked up the opponent offensive and defensive S&P rankings, and then what the scores were. So I looked at the overall averages for the season, and then I looked at the 4 best offensive and 4 best defensive teams that each of them played, what the averages of those teams were, and what the average points were. So Alabama, overall on average, played the 49th and 53 ranked offense and defense, respectively. So 49th ranked offense, 53 ranked defense, which is slightly better than average. So in these S&P rankings, like 62, 63 essentially is the average team. So anything lower than 60 is better than average. Anything higher than 60 was a below average team. So just a little bit above average on both offense and defense overall for Alabama's season. Now, if we look at the 4 best offenses and 4 best defenses that they played, Alabama played the 11th was the average of the 4 best offenses, and 28 was the average of the 4 best defenses. Now, Alabama scored 35 points, they scored 46.5 points on average against that 29 or 28 ranked defense. And they gave up 35.5 against 11th ranked offenses. So they played, the 4 best teams they played some good offenses. And that was Florida, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Texas A&M. Only one of those teams in the top 10 total 2 of them were in the top 10 on total on offense. That was Ole Miss and Florida. And those 2 teams scored 47 points on average against Alabama's defense. They played one top 10 defense, that was Georgia, who is the number 6 defense, and Alabama scored 41 points against them. So that's a pretty good showing by Alabama. Now, Alabama is the best offense according to the S&P, and best offense by a significant margin. They're 3 standard deviations above average. Clemson is like 2.5. They're the number 2 offense. Florida is about 2. So they're a full standard deviation better than Florida, who was the number 4 offense in the country. That's how good statistically Alabama's offense has been. And that makes them by far Clemson is the number 6 offense. Sorry, but makes them by far the best offense that Notre Dame will have faced so far. Now, really looking at these, at how Alabama has played this season, they have consistently scored points. The lowest number of points they scored in any game this season was 38 against Missouri in the very first game. Since then, they have not scored less than 40 points. And the lowest of those being 41 against Georgia, the number 6 defense in the country. Now, overall, the SEC has not been great in offense this year, outside really of Florida, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. The SEC was not great on offense, and they weren't really elite on defense either, but they had some pretty good defenses. But Alabama consistently scored points, and for the most part consistently held people. Now, those 2 outliers, Ole Miss and Florida, I think do show that if you're playing a team with an elite offense, they will be able to score points on Alabama. But I think this also shows that Alabama is going to get their points against anyone. I do not think there is a defense that is going to be able to completely shut Alabama down. And I think that's a big part of that is the way college football has changed. These RPO offenses are extremely difficult to completely stop. You can limit them a little bit, but it is almost impossible to keep them from scoring points if you have an elite offense. And that's why I think Alabama is going to get their points. Now, Notre Dame was the 11th ranked offense in the country and the 9th ranked defense. The 4 best teams they played pretty good offenses, actually, which I was surprised. They played the 18th ranked offense out of their 4th best, and the average of the 4 best defenses was 40th. So, pretty good, but still not as good as what Alabama faced. And they scored less points against, or they scored about the same amount of points. They scored less points against not as good defenses, and they gave up slightly less points, but against significantly worse offenses. And I don't really think the defensive numbers matter as much, because I think Alabama is going to be able to score points on Notre Dame. Now, some good things I saw here in Notre Dame stuff. So UNC had a very highly ranked offense, and Notre Dame held them to 17 points. Louisville had a very good offense. Notre Dame held them to 7 points. They've shown that they can limit some of these good teams. But having said that, Clemson scored 40 and 34 on them. And I think Alabama is a better offense than Clemson. They're a significantly better offense than Clemson. Florida has a better offense statistically than Clemson does. I think that is going to be a big issue for Notre Dame. I do not see Notre Dame keeping Alabama under 35 points. Now, how many points can Notre Dame score on Alabama? Clemson has a better defense than Alabama does. Clemson is the number 1 defense in the country statistically. So I think there is a shot that Notre Dame can also score some points in this game. They were able to fairly consistently put up points. So their lowest outing, of course, was against Clemson in that ACC championship game, only scored 10 points. But they also only scored 12 points against Louisville, which is the number 72 defense in the country, so worse than average. They only scored 27 on Duke, which of course was the first game of the season, so I kind of throw that out a little bit. They're the 86th ranked defense. Scored 31 against Georgia Tech and UNC, the 71 and 60th ranked defense. So UNC about an average defense statistically. 31 points. That's a good outing, but that's worse than Alabama did in any game they played, including that first game. It's 10 points worse than they did otherwise if you throw that first game out. So it's these couple of low-scoring games, really the Louisville game and that last game against Clemson, that make me question Notre Dame. Especially against a team that is going to be able to score points. And these teams, like, overall, are pretty close as far as the kind of schedule they played. Both played 2 top 10 offenses, both played 1 top 10 defense. Alabama gave up more points to those top 10 offenses, but scored more points on the defense. So I really, really do not trust Notre Dame in this game. I do not really think that they have a chance of getting a win. Now, as far as the spread goes, Alabama a 20-point favorite in this game, a huge spread. Now, Notre Dame lost its last game by 24, so it lost its last game by more than that. If we look at where Notre Dame is on offense, they are 9th, and they're 11th overall in offense. That puts them just a little bit behind Ole Miss, who scored 48 points on Alabama. But if you look at Texas A&M, who is also they're 13, so they're just a little bit the other side of Notre Dame, they were only able to score 24. I do think I am going to take Alabama to cover in this game. I'm not super confident in that, but it is under 3 touchdowns, which I think could be important. Definitely, if this thing was getting close, if this was over 21, I would take Notre Dame plus the points. I do think that 1 point matters as far as covering goes. And I think there's a chance that Notre Dame can show up and surprise some people. They've put up points in some of these games. Now, they played a lot of really bad defenses. But even against some of these, I mean, the first time Clemson played, I do think Clemson was not playing its best game on defense there. And that's how they got so many points. But they played a Pitt team that had a pretty good defense, put up 45 points. I think Clemson has an opportunity to score some points here. I do not think they can get enough done to overcome the amount of points that Alabama is going to be able to score, though. I think Alabama wins easy. Alabama straight up all day. I am taking Alabama to cover, but I am less confident in that covering pick. I do think there is a chance that Notre Dame comes out and does a little bit. I do not super trust Alabama's defense still. That Florida game, I really thought Alabama would shut their offense down a little bit more, and Florida almost came back in that game. Now, Alabama looked like they were going to run away with it in the first half, and I really think that is going to be the story in this game. I think Alabama gets away in the first half, and I don't think, unlike Florida, Notre Dame does not have the explosive offense to score a bunch of points quickly and come back. And I think that first half trend continues and into the second half, and Alabama runs away with it a little bit. So that's sort of my storyline there on why Alabama wins and covers. I do think Alabama is significantly a better team. I think Notre Dame is going to get embarrassed in the playoffs again. We'll see how long it takes for one of these 4th seed teams to really do anything in the playoff games, because we haven't seen it yet. All right, moving on to Clemson and Ohio State. Now, Clemson and Alabama, as far as averages over their season, played pretty similar overall offensive ratings and defensive rating teams. So Clemson played, on average, 49th ranked offense, and on average, a 48th ranked defense, which was pretty close to what Alabama played. Ohio State, on the other hand, played on average a 31 ranked defense, so a very good defense, but a 71 ranked offense. So on average, Ohio State, the offenses that they played were about as far below average as Clemson, the offenses that they played, were above average. Now, they played significantly better defenses. As far as the 4 best for offense and defense for Clemson, the 4 best offensive teams they played, their average ranking was 25. For Ohio State, their 4 best offenses they played, the average ranking was a 54. So just slightly better than average. As far as defenses go, for Clemson, the 4 best defenses they played were a 30 on average. And for Ohio State, the 4 best were a 16. So Ohio State, the 4 best teams they played, average really probably an elite defense. Now, Clemson, to the 30th ranked on average defense, gave on average 21 points. For Ohio State, for the 55 ranked offense, also gave up 21 points. And I think that's where you're going to see the biggest issue for Ohio State in this game. So they played much worse offenses than Clemson did and gave up the same amount of points. Clemson played worse defenses on average, but even when they played good defenses, were able to score points. So of the 4 best defensive teams, Ohio State was the 16th ranked defense they played, so an elite defense as far as those top 4 teams go. And they were able to score 38 points on average in those games. Clemson played the 30th ranked defense as far as the average of their 4 best teams went, and was able to score 43 points. So played worse defenses, scored slightly more points, but really there's not much difference between 43 and 38. So I do think Ohio State has a good offense. They were able to score points against really good defenses, but none of those teams had a good offense. The best offense that Ohio State played was Indiana. They're the 32nd best offense in the country. By comparison, Clemson played 3 teams with better offenses than the best team that Ohio State played. And in those games, outside of the Notre Dame game, held those teams fairly well. Now, Clemson has the best defense in the country. They are statistically the #1 overall defense. I think they have a very good defense. I really do think that first time they played Notre Dame was kind of an anomaly. I think their defense is better than that game showed. I do think Ohio State is going to be able to score some points, though. That Notre Dame game showed that teams can score points on them, and I think Ohio State is a better offense than Notre Dame is. But in the rest of these games, Clemson really shut teams down. And they didn't play great offenses. Neither Clemson or Ohio State played a top 10 offense. Notre Dame was the best offense that Clemson played. That may have helped their defensive numbers a little bit. Both of these teams played one top 10 defense. Ohio State played Northwestern, the #2 defense in the country, and was able to score 22 points in that game. Clemson played Notre Dame. They were both the best offense and the best defense that Clemson faced this year. And they scored, in between the two games, they scored 40 and 34. So about 37 points on average. And I do think that Clemson is going to be able to score points in this game. I think that is going to be Ohio State's issue. I do not think Clemson will be able to completely shut them down. Ohio State has played very good defenses and has consistently been able to score points, but they have also consistently given up points to teams with bad offenses. They have not played good offenses at all. They played an even number of teams well below average and only played a couple of teams slightly above average on offense. They played the 49th, the 43rd, the 106th, the 32nd, the 105th, and the 93rd offenses in the country. A lot of those offenses are really, really bad offenses. Anything probably 75 or up is significantly poor offense. They should have been able to hold some of those teams to less points. Rutgers scored 27 on them. They were 106th best offense. Now, they held Michigan State and Northwestern, the other two really bad offenses they played, to only a few points, to 12 and 10. But still, especially that Northwestern game, that was a rough game for Ohio State. They ended up figuring out that they could run the ball. Northwestern is absolutely an elite pass defense, but has not been great at rush defense. I think Ohio State figured out that they were able to have success running the ball, and that is how they won that game. That could have been a much tougher game for Ohio State. They sort of got lucky there that Northwestern was not able to stop some of that run and got away with it. An elite team should have been able to hold Northwestern to less points, I think. So really, for me, the issue I have in this game is Ohio State's defense. I do think Ohio State is going to score points. I do not see Ohio State being able to limit Clemson offensively, though. I think Clemson is going to get their points. I think Clemson is able to score 40 points in this game. Now, I do think that Ohio State is going to score more than they did against Northwestern. I think for two reasons. One, I think Ohio State has a pretty good offense. I think they will be able to score points. And I think Clemson's defensive numbers are slightly elevated because they, for the most part, didn't play elite offenses. I do not think Ohio State scores enough to win in this game, though. Now, looking at the spread, Clemson is a 7.5-point favorite. I was very back and forth on the spread pick in this one. Looking at the stats, I do think Clemson is going to score points. I think there's a chance that they shut down Ohio State's offense, and we see something like a 40-20 something game, in which case Clemson easily covers. I am going to trust that Northwestern game was kind of an anomaly. Other than that, Ohio State has put up a bunch of points. They scored 22 in that game. The next lowest score they had was 38 against Penn State. I think Ohio State is going to get around 35 points in this game. I think that's going to put it really close to the point spread. I can see this game being a 42-35 game where Clemson wins by a touchdown. I think that half a point is going to be really important spread-wise. I think it's certainly possible that Clemson wins this game by more than a touchdown. But I think it's much more likely that Ohio State keeps it a little bit close, and we see Clemson win by 5 to 7 points, somewhere in that range. But really, 5 points, it will be weird. I think most likely you see 2 field goals to a touchdown win by Clemson. I think that would be my bet. 6 to 7 points Clemson wins by. You never know with these games. Ohio State could show up and play great. Clemson's offensive coordinator is not going to be at this game because he has COVID. Does that slow down Clemson's offense a little bit? That could end up being the difference in this game. It could certainly end up being the difference between Clemson winning and covering, and then winning and not covering. But I think if I had to give a straight up pick, it's definitely Clemson. I'm going to take Ohio State plus the 7.5. I do think they have a chance of winning. I think this is going to be a much more competitive game than the Alabama-Notre Dame game. I think Clemson gets it done, though. I do think they're the better team. I think Ohio State's defense is going to let them down in this game. I think they're going to give up a few too many points to Clemson, and Clemson is going to do just enough to keep Ohio State from being able to come back. Give me Clemson to win, but not to cover. All right, that's it for the playoff games. I'll be doing another pick video when it comes to the national championship. As far as my picks go, I do think it's going to be Clemson and Alabama, which is, I'm sure, a huge surprise because who would pick either of those teams to go to the national championship? And I think Alabama wins it. We'll see, though. It may not even be those two teams. It could be Notre Dame and Ohio State. I really do not think that's very likely, but it could happen. So I will save that pick video until after we get to watch these playoff games, see how these teams play, and see who's actually in the championship. If you want to see that game, subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed this video, click the like button. I'll see you next time.